Hello and welcome to IndieSider number 8. My name is Ken Gaggy and I'll be your host as I play Super Win the Game, a 2D platformer slash Metroidvania for PC, Mac, and Linux, released today, October 1st, 2014, on Steam from Minor Key Games. I'll be interviewing Mr. J. Kyle Pittman, the co-founder and developer behind this game, later on in this video. But first, a brief introduction to the game. I am playing it on the Mac on a preview copy provided to me by the studio, and you can use the mouse, but I'm going to be using my Xbox 360 controller. And there are tons of options in this game, so I'll show you them once I'm actually in the game. It makes more sense then. So this is not the very beginning. I'm already into the game a little bit. And let me show you some of the neat features on how classic this game works. Crt Emulation, I'm going to turn that on. And look at that. Scan lines, pixelation, a curved screen, margins. This is definitely your retro game style, but I can't stand it. So I'm going to turn that feature off. Oh my goodness. I mean, we've evolved beyond this. I still like classic games, I just don't need them to use that limitation. Lots of other fun stuff. Anyway, more to the point, this game is a 2D platformer slash Metroidvania, as I already said. This is the overworld as I look for new castles and towns to explore. So this is the side-scrolling view where most of the action occurs. Hi, guy. Okay, a vague clue, just like old times. You have very limited input options as far as what your character can do, and that's actually one of the game's strengths, not a design flaw in any way, shape, or form. That bell is a checkpoint in case I die, and that bat will kill me if I get touched even once, then I just get sent back to the nearest checkpoint. And those bells are liberally spread throughout the world. But I don't die if I fall down that pit, because it ain't a pit. But these spikes I definitely want to avoid. Whoops. Gotta get the timing down right on that. Let's, whoops, not go that way. Actually, we can go that way. Let's do it. No, we can't. Oh, gem. There are only like 128 of those throughout the entire game, so you want to get them whenever you can. 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. Hey, good. Binary counting. I bet you there's a hidden passage over here. Oh, can't get into that little spot. So I lost that bet. So this is not one of the actual dungeons, and if it were, dungeons don't have bosses like old Zelda II games or Metroidvania games do. That's why the developer actually doesn't like using the word Metroidvania, because he feels that, whoa, hi. Okay, so now where am I? Snowstorm hides a secret, he said. But first, let's, was that a town back there? Yeah, let's go into town. I'll show you one of the less dangerous areas to explore. So this is, again, very much like Zelda II. You can buy gems and keys here in this lodge. Here's a key to the basement. Thanks. Very few keys in this game, and a lot of locked doors. Theoretically, I could save that key and go use it somewhere else. I didn't see a penguin. Let's see. Where's my inventory? There it is. So I have 16 gems, I have 4 power-ups. And those are the red and blue tiles. I don't know why they show up black and white here. It makes red and blue blocks fill in, just like in Super Mario Bros. 3. Nope, just like in Super Mario World. My bad. The snorkel lets me swim, and the lightning bolt lets me pass through electric barriers without dying. Not dying is a good thing. Jeweler, I can buy keys if I want, or even a skull key. I don't know what that is. Maybe it opens all doors. Fortune teller will tell me I've been playing this game for half an hour and have died on average more often than once a minute. Awesome. I can borrow a key and that will incur a debt. I don't know what sort of debt that is, but I don't like debts. So now I need to go to the Ice Palace, which you can bet your patootie I was going to do anyway, because I would like to progress through this game. So let's do that. This is a very small town, not much to explore. Oh, there's my sad penguin. That's not a sentence I've ever said before. And get lost in the snowstorm. No random encounters, so this is not Dragon Warrior, which is kind of nice. Not even Zelda II, even. Stay warm. Okay, and now I won't die. Or I won't be sent farther back than that level. Oh, that was quick. Wait, that can't be the whole level. What did I just find? What was that thing? A single heart. Okay. Not entirely sure what that lets me do. Maybe I can die or something now and not have to start over. I can almost make out the outlines of all the lakes in this area. Huh, another cave. Ah, here's the real dungeon. Oh, I have to cross the bridge. It's not automatic. Now, I do have snorkels, which let me swim if I fall in the water, which is nice. There might even be a hidden treasure trove down there. But I'm focusing on getting to the palace so I can show you what that looks like. Oh, what does this say? Slippery when always. True. So you can see there's a lot of platforming action here. Not many secrets or tricks to getting around this. I can't jump on enemies and kill them. There is no touching of the enemies. No touching! Ah, there we go. I just had to slow down a bit, not be in such a darn rush. I can go this way and get that. But I'm actually going to focus on getting up here. Whoop. Oh! Didn't make that jump. But these blocks will come back. You don't even have to leave the room. See? Whoop. How many times have I died now? 52? There, that's one of the 128 gems, I think. I'll try approaching that locked door from a different path. Whoa! Hey, I made it. Alright, let's see. Oh, there's the Arcadian. A guy. He's frozen solid. Read the note. I fear I am not long for this world. Oh, come on. People don't die. I pass from this realm to rejoin my kin among the stars. The treasure of these caverns will carry you to great heights. Would that be the double jump, or something else? Alright, oh, there's one of those gems over here, isn't there? Yep. But now I have to bring this thing back up, ride this way. Loving the joystick support, that just makes everything so much easier. I don't think Rex Rocket that I played last week had that feature. Oh, almost made it. That wasn't a matter of timing, that was just a matter of me getting stuck. And if I push down, I'll fall through this platform. Yay, made it. I want that gem. I want all the gems. Got it. Alright, moving on. Mushrooms lets me bounce higher. Oh, I saw this room in the demo, actually. Not the demo, the trailer. Oh. Oh, almost made it. Or not. Oh. Okay. Oh! I couldn't jump faster than the spikes could raise. There we go. Now what? More spikes! Spiky death! That's what a friend of mine used to call Limbo. That was a good game. This game reminds me of VVVVVV. V? I don't remember how many V's there are. But there are other areas that are very obviously inspired by Super Mario Brothers or Zelda II. And sometimes it even looks like it's the same sprites. I'll be asking the developer about that later. Let's see, so I need to release this block to serve as a shield for me. There we go. Hey, cool. I missed a heart down there, though. Now, I've already detected several passages, or rather not detected, but noted several passages I've missed in my exploration of this level. Got that. And so you want to be mapping out your game, so that you remember where you've gone and how to get back. Spring heel boots enable the wearer to jump again in midair. Wow. So that's it. There's no boss like there would be in the other Zelda game. Ah. Oh, I forgot to read the book at the end of the second level. Oh, I read that there are these, like, black and white noir dream sequences that the developer uses to explore more abstract concepts. Wow, trippy. Okay, so with that all in mind, let's pause here, or not pause, but rather let's bring on the developer and continue playing the game while we speak with him to learn a little bit more about what went into making Super Win the Game, sequel to You Have to Win the Game. Today I'm speaking with Mr. Kyle Pittman, co-founder and developer at Minor Key Games, responsible for Super Win the Game. Hello, Kyle.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good.
Excellent. You must be so busy with the game as we're speaking, coming out less than a week.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. It's, I guess, 4 days away now, and, yeah, it's it's pretty crazy. The game's, it's been done for a couple of weeks. I'm just sort of doing last-minute polish and bug fixes and all that fun stuff.
As the deadline approaches, you're always wondering, what did I miss?
Right.
I do the same thing with magazines, where once it goes to print, I try not to look at it because I'm going to find something that I forgot.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience of, like, I know that I should be playing the game and testing it and looking for bugs, but I sort of just don't want to touch it.
So this game is the follow-up to You Have to Win the Game, which was a free platformer. So since it was free, what sort of metrics did you have to determine whether a sequel was warranted?
Yeah, I developed You Have to Win the Game sort of as a side project a couple of years ago while I was working in the AAA industry. And then last summer, my brother and I decided that we wanted to do indie game development. So we formed Minor Key Games. And I was actually working on a different project for a few months. But I guess going back to January, I was at Steam Dev Days, and I was sort of thinking about, like, was this project I was working on really the one I wanted to do, and did I have any better ideas? And this idea just struck me that, hey, why don't I do a sequel to that thing that I did a couple years ago that everyone seemed to love? I had so many people tell me that, like, oh, you could have charged, $5, $10, whatever, for You Have to Win the Game. I was like, if I made a sequel and I made it my full-time job and put everything I have into it, I could make something really, really cool that I feel like would be worth paying money for, and could stand as a sequel to a free game, which is something that's a little bit scary to do, but I feel pretty good about it.
Are you anticipating any pushback from people who said, oh, the first game was free, the sequel should be too?
I mean, a little bit, yeah, but everyone who I've talked to about it understands that, like, yeah, this is my full-time job now. If I can't make money off of what I'm doing, then I can't continue to make games. So I think there is that sort of understanding that the first one was free because it was a side project. It was something that I was able to do in my free time. So I think people generally understand that.
You mentioned working in the AAA industry. If I understand correctly, you were working on Borderlands with Gearbox. Is that correct?
Yeah, I worked at Gearbox for about 6 or 7 years. I worked on both of the Borderlands games, and also like Duke Nukem Forever and Aliens and a few others that I don't really talk about as much. But yeah, it was a really good experience, a really good company, and I had a lot of fun working in AAA. I guess the sort of the reasons like why I wanted to go from AAA to indie development was mostly that I was working as a programmer there, and I want to have like more of a design role, have more autonomy in developing the sorts of ideas for games that I wanted to do. And I was doing a little bit of that in my side projects with games like You Have to Win the Game, but I really sort of wanted to transition into making that my full-time job.
So for Super Win the Game, how much of the original game's engine or assets were you able to reuse?
I've been developing my own game engine just sort of as a hobby for fun for probably 7 or 8 years now. So I built on top of a lot of the stuff that I had already had for You Have to Win the Game, as far as the sort of fundamental building blocks of the engine, collision and rendering and all that stuff. I didn't change too much of that. I did build like an entirely new level editor because the one I had was sort of very specifically built for that first game and couldn't do a lot of the new things that I wanted to do. But yeah, I mean, I've tried to reuse as much as I can just because the more I can reuse, the sooner I can get the game done, I guess.
I've been playing the game a bit, exploring all the different levels that are in there, and I understand that despite the sort of going forward and discovering new items and going back and opening new areas, you nonetheless prefer that this game not be called a Metroidvania. What sort of baggage do you associate with that genre?
I have called it a Metroidvania at times, but I didn't want to bill it as a Metroidvania when promoting it or marketing it, just because I think that labels like that tend to get a little fuzzy because everyone has their own expectations of what that means. You know, if I say, hey, this is a Metroidvania, someone might assume that it has combat, or that there are bosses, or that the game is a certain length, or whatever else that they might, you know, sort of associate with that term. And when I say Metroidvania, I'm mostly thinking about the fact that you know, you'll see places at the start of the game that you can't get to yet, and you'll be able to come back to those places later once you've found new power-ups, once you have new abilities, and you'll be able to advance further from there. But, you know, obviously that's my definition of what Metroidvania is, and that wouldn't necessarily always correspond to other players' expectations. So that's why I've been avoiding terms like that and trying to focus on like what the actual game features are, and if people come to the conclusion that it's a Metroidvania of their own accord, that's awesome.
Oh, that's fascinating. I hadn't considered that weapons and bosses might be an inherent part of the definition of Metroidvania, but you're onto something, because one of the terms that I've found to be very problematic in this YouTube series is roguelike. A lot of people are using roguelike, and I tell you, some of the games I've played on this channel, they're fantastic games, and I love playing them, but they're not roguelikes.
Roguelike has sort of become conflated with permadeath, but even then you have games that have permadeath, but also have some sort of metagame progression, so it's not like you really lose all of your progress when you die. So I like the procedural death labyrinth, the term that's sort of arisen as an alternative to roguelike.
I mean, I've even heard the term roguelike-like, and I'm okay with that. You know, so your game is Metroidvania-like.
Yeah.
Now, on that same topic, there are times when I feel like I have a lot of options in your game about where I can go next and what levels to tackle, and I almost don't have much direction on what I'm supposed to do next. Does the game offer a lot of freedom in what order I can go in, or am I actually following a prescribed path?
Yeah, there are a few different ways that you can go from the start of the game. Sort of the progression is largely tied to which power-ups you find and what abilities those give you. But from the start of the game, there are a few different places you can go, different power-ups that you can collect at first, and that was by design. I wanted to have that sort of open-ended freedom of exploration. I've been playing a lot of, you know, Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2 recently, and I like the freedom that those games give players. I wanted to try to make something that took that freedom of exploration but put in a game that was not about combat, it was just about platforming and, you know, treasure hunting and those sorts of things.
So far I have found the red crystal, the blue crystal, and the snorkel in that order. Is that a typical gameplay experience?
Yeah, definitely. I would say getting those two crystals first is what most players do. You can actually get the double jump boots as the very first thing if you know what you're doing, but I don't expect most players to do that. But I think that once players start to figure that stuff out, that's going to be really interesting to see what speedrunners do, because there are some power-ups in the game that are completely optional, and you can avoid getting them entirely. It just makes the game more difficult.
If I had known how open the game was when I started playing, I would have pulled out my sketchbook and started mapping my route. Is there any sort of mapping function in the game?
No, that was something that I sort of went back and forth on for a while. I considered putting in a mini-map, like on the inventory screen or something, but it would have been difficult to automate that process, just because of the way I build my levels. Sometimes there are rooms that are adjacent to each other, but I wouldn't necessarily want them to show up at the same place on a mini-map, so I would have had to author that content a little bit differently, and it never felt like it was worth the trouble that it would cause me. And I think, too, a lot of the old NES games that I'm drawing inspiration from didn't always have mini-maps. You know, you play The Legend of Zelda, and it has like some sort of little map up in the corner, but it doesn't really show you where you're going. It doesn't give you a whole lot of idea of where you are in the world. So I think, and maybe this is just me making excuses for not putting a feature in, but it feels like it stays truer to those early NES roots to not have that sort of mapping functionality, and to put that responsibility on the player to sort of create their own maps if they want them.
No, I totally get that. Now, another thing that's missing from this game, and you mentioned this when talking about the definition of Metroidvania, was weapons. There doesn't seem to be a point where I'm going to collect a power-up that allows me to finally attack those scorpions and snakes, even though this game is sometimes called a platformer, which brings to my mind the original Super Mario Bros., which had fireballs, or Mario 2, which had vegetables. So am I never going to find any sort of projectile or offensive weapon in this game?
That's right, and that was a deliberate design choice. I wanted to make a game that was strictly about mobility and traversing a world and completely remove any element of combat. So yeah, you'll never find a melee weapon, you'll never find fireballs, you'll never be able to jump on enemies to kill them. Literally the only thing you can do is try to avoid enemies and collect treasure and collect new abilities. And that was sort of a design decision that came from having worked on a lot of first-person shooters and a lot of games that people would say are, overly violent or whatever. I wanted to do something that was kind of the opposite of that, and that's not necessarily something that I'm going to stick to in the future. I probably will make another first-person shooter at some point down the road, but I thought for the first game that I'm developing for Minor Key Games, I wanted to do something that was a little bit different than anything I've done in the past.
I think the decision to eliminate any offensive tactics is interesting and probably a positive one, because this game reminds me of one of my favorite computer games of all time, which is VVVVVV.
Oh yeah, V was a huge inspiration on the original You Have to Win the Game, and yeah, it's one of my all-time favorite games as well.
Now, another restriction you've placed on this game is using the original color palette for the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System, so it looks like a game that could have actually existed in 1990. But in what ways did you decide not to limit yourself to that era and take advantage of the technology available nowadays to make this game, either in a way that benefited you as a developer or in ways that the player will see?
Cool, yeah. Yeah, I mean, wherever possible, I tried to stick to the limitations of the original NES hardware. So I am using the original color palette. I am, the sprites are limited to 3 colors plus transparency. The audio is like a 4-channel synthesizer, just like the NES had. I guess where I sort of diverge from that is wherever it was not easy to work within those constraints, or I guess not easy to place those constraints on myself. So for instance, the original NES had a hard limit of 16 colors on screen at once. And there's not really a good way to force that restriction when you're talking about working with Direct3D and OpenGL on modern hardware. So I just kind of hand-waved that one away, and I assume most players won't notice that, sometimes there are more than 16 colors on screen. But I guess the other big thing is just like, when you're working on PC, you have essentially unlimited memory, which is such a contrast from actually working on the NES, where it's a fixed memory platform and you have a very, very limited amount of things that you can store. And that's why you look at so many old NES games and enemies would respawn as soon as they were off the screen. The game would lose track of maybe what power-ups you had collected or which ones you hadn't. And a lot of that was just because it didn't have the memory to keep track of those things once they were sort of outside the scope of what you were actually viewing. So that's something that, working on a PC with unlimited memory and unlimited hard drive space, I can sort of keep track of all that stuff.
But you can still use modern technology to catch that retro vibe, especially in the way you've implemented the CRT. Yeah,
and that's something where the CRT effect, I had written that actually for a game jam several years ago, and then I reused it for the first You Have to Win the Game. And then for this one, I added a few new features, but I also went the extra step of making it totally customizable. So if you go into the options menu, there's a whole bunch of sliders that let you change things like the intensity of the scan lines, how much curvature there is on the screen, how much motion blur characters leave behind as they move, and all that sort of stuff. That's something where sometimes people would play the game and they would give me feedback like, it looks cool, but it's not exactly how I remember. Maybe it's, too strong of an effect, not strong enough. And by putting that in players' hands to customize the experience that they want, I think that's something that I was really hoping to be able to do, and I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Have you gotten any feedback from younger gamers who never experienced a CRT and they're wondering, what is this? Why would anybody play like this?
I haven't had that reaction of not actually knowing what a CRT is at all, but it has been funny to see reactions from different age groups at some of the events that I've been going to. People my age and older tend to instantly get it. And then teenagers and maybe, younger college-age students actually tend to be the most cynical about it. But then once you get a little bit younger than that, down to like, elementary school age kids, they actually seem to really like it. I'm not sure whether it's just that it's something new and different, because at that age, obviously, they're not going to have that sort of retro nostalgia themselves. But yeah, it's been funny to see those different reactions at different ages.
I think there are some things that younger gamers just don't appreciate about the reality of old school graphics. For example, they can play a modern implementation of Asteroids, the classic arcade game, or they can emulate it, but it's very different to actually go to an arcade and see those vector graphics. It doesn't look like something that you've emulated.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, even the same thing, playing, I have a bunch of like retro games collections and arcade games collections for the 360, and I play those on my HD TV screen. And it's like, okay, it's the same gameplay, but it's not the same experience of going to an arcade and seeing the sort of fuzzy graphics on an old, slightly curved arcade screen. And yeah, it's the medium, I think, really does make a big difference to the perception of what the game is.
I'm forgetting the name of it, but isn't there this very expensive $400 device that you can use to connect a retro home console to a modern HD TV, and it will even implement scan lines for you?
Probably so. I think the Retron 5 may do that. I don't have one myself, but I've been hearing a lot of people talk about it.
Found it. It's the XRGB Mini FrameMeister Compact Upscaler Unit from Solaris, Japan. There will be a link in the show notes. Speaking of graphics, Flappy Bird got a lot of flack for borrowing a little too liberally from Super Mario's aesthetics, and unfortunately I saw some comments on Polygon almost accusing you of doing the same thing. And there are certainly times when I'm playing your game and I say, oh, that reminds me a lot of Zelda II, or those clouds remind me of Super Mario Bros. So how do you tread that line between being inspired by a classic game and borrowing too liberally?
Yeah, I've had a few people ask me that in person. Like, I've had people ask me if I actually lifted art directly from Zelda II or Metroid. And no, none of the art is actually stolen. Some of it was very, very closely and deliberately copied. I would have a screenshot of Zelda 2 or Metroid open and then be drawing my own tiles, trying to get something similar to what they did. But yeah, it is a fine line between making those sorts of deliberate callbacks to older games and just straight up copying them. And I think where I feel like I get away with that is that I do have a good amount of unique content in this game, and the gameplay itself is so different from Zelda 2 or Metroid. Like, yeah, it's a side-scrolling platformer, but most games from that era were. So I don't feel too bad about, having some of those very obvious callbacks. I think probably the most egregious one is there's one dungeon in the game where the first room, the entire facade of the dungeon is literally copied tile for tile from the first dungeon of Zelda 2. I was like, okay, I did that. I'm done with putting those references in there.
Is that where you ride the elevator down?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was surprised by how I can be playing the game and feel like, oh, this is like Zelda 2, and then I'm exploring a little bit more and it feels more like Metroid, and then I go to the overworld and it feels like Startropics. It's a lot of different games in there.
Yeah, I wanted to try to make something that really felt like it could have existed on the original NES by virtue of the fact that it feels like a lot of games that you've played in the past. So hopefully that turned out pretty well.
You said you've gotten some questions and reactions in person at various conventions, and you have been very busy on the convention circuit. You went to 1 show in June, 3 in July, and 2 this month, all in Texas. So how is it that you get into so many shows?
I mean, some of them were things that friends told me about, or things that friends were organizing. The Indie Game Showcase that I did back in June, that was something that a friend of mine was setting up. For some of the other ones, like the Rooster Teeth Expo or Screw Attack Convention or QuakeCon, I just signed up for those as early in advance as I was able to, and got some booth space and brought all my stuff. But yeah, it has been a busy couple of months, but it's been a really good experience, and I think being able to give players the chance to actually play the game and understand how it feels has been a big win, because that's something that you can't really describe in text or with screenshots. And I think the experience of actually playing it probably sells it better than anything else that I could do to promote it. And it's also been really good for me just to sort of watch people play it and understand like, where are the directions not clear? Where are people, dying too frequently? Does the game need to be harder? Does it need to be less difficult? Sort of just observe all those things by watching people play.
All 6 conventions that I mentioned have been in Texas. Did you consider taking the game on the road, such as the recent PAX Prime?
I'd love to do PAX Prime at some point. I've actually been going to PAX Prime as an attendee almost every year since it started. But so far, it just hasn't really made sense financially. It's expensive to get booth space there. It would be expensive to bring all of our equipment up there. So I've been looking for opportunities close to where I live, which is North Dallas, Texas. But yeah, definitely at some point in the future, hopefully if Minor Key Games continues to grow, we can sort of branch out and start going to other places.
You said one of the best ways to get this game into players' hands is to go to conventions. As far as I know, you didn't make this game available via early access on Steam. Why is that?
I have mixed feelings about early access. I feel like if you, at least this is just sort of my own experience from what I've seen from what other games have done, if a game comes out on early access and they have a really, really strong prototype, very often that's because the game is near completion. But I don't think that players necessarily have that understanding that the game isn't going to grow too much more than it already is. And conversely, if you put a game on early access and the prototype maybe has some cool ideas, but it's buggy and crashes a lot and it's not very polished, I think that that can hurt players' impressions of the game, even if there is a very strong promise there, and even if it is clear that the game is going to develop in a lot of different ways before it ships. So I feel like it's worked for some developers in the past, and even though it wasn't billed as early access, obviously Minecraft had that sort of experience of, selling the game when it was in an early form, and that worked super well for Minecraft. But I feel like for a lot of games, and for a lot of developers, it's probably not the right choice. So it wasn't something that I wanted to pursue for this game, and it's probably not something that I'm going to look into in the future, unless it just really, really makes sense for some game design that I have. But I've sort of had similar experiences with Kickstarter, and that's why we haven't yet done any Kickstarter projects with Minor Key Games. I feel like the risks tend to outweigh the rewards in a lot of those cases.
Super Win the Game is very different from Minor Key's previous game, Eldritch, which was from a first-person perspective. So what would you say are the common qualities of these games that tie your portfolio together?
Yeah, so actually the name of the company, Minor Key, we wanted to have a name that evoked the qualities that we enjoy in games, something that has just a bit of a dark edge to it, and I say that having just made this game that's, at least on the surface, seems like this super happy, fun platformer, but I do think that, I guess we're trying to make something that evokes a certain feeling. So even though, Eldritch and Super Win are very different games functionally, I think that the experience of playing them should hopefully sort of evoke the similar feelings in players. I know that's sort of a vague, intangible answer, but it's the best one I got.
Minor Key is a company that you co-found with your brother, and I have 3 older brothers of my own. Unfortunately, they don't play video games, but even if they did, I can't imagine that we would ever get along long enough to make a game together. So what's it like to work with your brother? So
actually, even though we have the company together, we don't really work closely together. I live here in Plano, Texas. David lives out in Novato, California, and we are actually sort of working on these games separately. So Eldritch was developed 99% by David, and Super Win the Game was developed 99% by me. I guess our goal when we founded Minor Key Games was to be able to have the freedom to work the way that we would if we were just solo developers, but release those games under a shared identity so that we could get that sort of cross-promotion.
What did David contribute to Super Win the Game?
Probably one of the biggest things was the name. Back in January, we were at Steam Dev Days, and I came up with this idea for a sequel, and I was like, I don't really want to call it You Have to Win the Game 2, because at that point I was already so sick of saying You Have to Win the Game. It's just such a mouthful. I was like, I need to trim it down, and David suggested Super You Have to Win the Game first, and then we trimmed that down to Super Win the Game. But yeah, I mean, he's also, you know, given me a lot of feedback, played some of the early builds, given me design input. So yeah, those sorts of things.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad he thought of that, because I agree, it is a mouthful.
Yeah, and that was something where I knew that I was going to be taking the game on the road and going to all these conventions and stuff. I'm like, if I have to be saying, you know, you have to win the game too, to every single person I talk to, I'm like, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, if you had asked me, I would have suggested you have to win the game again, but I still think Super Win the Game is the best title you could have come up with.
Definitely, I think for whatever game I do next, it's going to be like a one-word title.
Ooh, any idea what that next game might be?
I've been throwing around a lot of ideas. At first, I was thinking I wanted to step away from the sort of retro-themed games and do something that was a complete 180 from that, maybe like a first-person shooter or something like you said. Then I'm like, I built all this technology. I have this cool, Crt Simulation. I have a level editor that works pretty well. So I've been throwing around a few ideas for like if I wanted to do another game that's sort of in the NES theme. And one idea I had was basically sort of answer the question of what would Super Win the Game look like if it were a roguelike, if it had permadeath, if it had combat, if it had some of these different things, but was functionally similar in the feel of movement and the way that you traverse through the world. So I've been throwing around some ideas like that, and we'll see what comes of that. I don't necessarily know if that will be the next thing I do, but that's sort of where my mind is right now.
Excellent, I'll keep an eye out. In the meantime, thanks so much for this behind-the-scenes look at Super Win the Game. Is there anything you want to add?
The game comes out October 1st. It's going to be on Steam, $12.99. You can also get the game and soundtrack together for $14.99. But yeah, I'm looking forward to everyone playing it, and hopefully everyone has a good time with it. And
remind us where we can find you and your company on Twitter or on the web.
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Minor Key Games. You can find me on Twitter at Pirate Hearts, and then our websites are minorkeygames.com, and the website for the game is superwinthegame.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Kyle. Good luck with the game's release.
Cool, yeah.